Hi all, in this video we're going to see about the energetics of muscle contraction. What do you mean by energetics? That means how much energy is required for muscle contraction and how does a muscle obtain that energy that is needed during the contraction. So this question can be asked as a short essay. It has been asked previously in many universities, so we'll see what the energetics is. So we know that for muscle contraction, the muscle needs energy in the form of ATP, that is adenosine triphosphate. Why does the muscle need ATP? Remember, we have different pumps that act based on the energy obtained from ATP. For example, we have the myosin ATPase, which is required for the cross bridge movement. We have the calcium ATPase, which pumps the calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And we also have the sodium potassium ATPase pump, which is required to restore the membrane potential. So all this requires ATP, and for muscle contraction to occur, the ATP supply must be sufficient. So now how does the muscle get the ATP required for muscle contraction? So I'll explain it diagrammatically. So suppose this is the muscle fiber and this is the blood. So first of all, the muscle fiber may have stored ATP. Even though it is very less, initially it utilizes the stored ATP for the utilization, for the functioning of the different pumps like the myosin ATPase, calcium ATPase, sodium potassium ATPase and all. But the role of stored ATP is very less. Once the stored ATP is depleted, then we have three methods by which the ATP can be generated. So the first method is there is a protein called creatine phosphate. So this protein can be, the phosphate group of this creatine can be given to an ATP molecule so that ATP can be formed. So this is the first method by which the creatine phosphate is converted to creatine, and the enzyme that helps in this process is called creatine kinase. Now suppose the creatine phosphate has been depleted, then the muscle will move on to the second method, which is glycolysis. So we know glycolysis is the process in which glucose or glycogen is anaerobically converted. It is put into the Cori cycle so that energy can be produced. So that is the second method, which is glycolysis. The end product of glycolysis is lactic acid. So basically, if the muscle utilizes glycolysis as its source of energy, then there will be accumulation of lactic acid inside the blood. And finally, the third one is utilization of oxygen or other compounds like fatty acids, amino acids, carbohydrates, etc. For the muscle will utilize them for oxidative phosphorylation so that ATP can be produced. So that is the third method. So first we have creatine phosphate, second glycolysis, and third is the oxidative phosphorylation method to get ATP required for muscle contraction. So we'll see each in more detail now. So as I said, the immediate source of energy is stored ATP. So ATP will be converted to ADP and phosphate, and it will release approximately 7.3 kilocalorie per mole. But the problem is the stored ATP in a resting muscle is usually very limited and it will last only for 2 to 3 seconds. So that is why we have the first source, which is the phosphocreatine. So we have phosphorylation of by the creatine phosphate so that it gives its phosphate to ADP, and the reaction is catalyzed by the enzyme creatine kinase so that ATP can be released. Now this is very fast, non-oxidative, and the amount of creatine phosphate inside a muscle is also 5 times more than that of the ATP. But the problem is, even in short, for short exercises and all, this might be enough, but the availability of creatine phosphate might be a limiting factor. So it can support contraction for a few seconds, but not for so long. So after some time during recovery, what happens is again the ATP will combine with creatine so that the creatine phosphate can be replenished. Some mitochondrial ATP also are used to restore the creatine phosphate. So the first source of ATP after the stored ATP is the phosphocreatine. Now once a phosphocreatine is depleted, as I said, the second source is glycolysis. So we know glycolysis is the anaerobic breakdown of glycogen in which the glycogen is broken down to pyruvate and lactic acid and it will release ATP. So the good thing is there is rapid ATP production. It is almost 2.5 times faster than the oxidative phosphorylation, and there will be net gain of 2 ATP per glucose. So it is useful when oxygen is unavailable. But what is the limitation here? There is accumulation of lactic acid. So after about 1 minute, there will be fatigue due to the accumulation of the lactic acid. So that's when we move on to the third source, which is oxidative phosphorylation. And it usually occurs in the mitochondria. It requires oxygen. The substrates are usually glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids. So these are converted by oxygen to ATP. And for long-term activity, more than 95% of the ATP is by this oxidative phosphorylation. It almost yields 36 to 38 ATP per glucose. See, when compared to a glycolysis, we just yield 2 ATP per glucose. Here, we have 36 to 38 ATP per glucose. And carbohydrate can be the main fuel for approximately 2 to 4 hours. Fats can help, especially in long duration exercises. So even though oxidative phosphorylation is slow, its output is really huge when compared to the other forms of energy. So in a nutshell, the sources of ATP are phosphocreatine, which is useful in the first 5 to 8 seconds, then glycolysis up to 1 minute. But after that, we have oxidative metabolism. Even though it is slower, its energy output is more. So what do you mean by oxygen depth? So suppose we have a strenuous activity. So what happens? The body will try to use more anaerobic glycolysis because it can, if suppose oxygen is not there, obviously the muscle will have to go for anaerobic glycolysis, and it can provide ATP rapidly. But the problem is anaerobic glycolysis, as I said, will lead to accumulation of lactic acid. So after exercise, all this lactic acid has to be converted back to pyruvate. So for that, it needs oxygen to convert lactate back to pyruvate, to replenish the ATP and the phosphocreatine stores, as well as replace the oxygen bound to myoglobin. That is why after strenuous exercise, we usually lead the athlete will have increased breathing after the exercise, and that is to actually pay off the extra oxygen debt. That is, we need oxygen for all this work because it was utilizing this anaerobic glycolysis. Okay, so it's the extra oxygen consumed above the basal rate after exertion. Now why are we talking about oxygen debt here? Because the entrained athletes, we have an application for this entrained athletes. Because of constant training, their muscle oxygen consumption is more. That means they know how to utilize the oxygen effectively. Their fatty acid utilization is more, so that oxidative phosphorylation can occur, and there is decreased glycogen depletion and lactate buildup, so that their oxygen depth is usually smaller. So in other words, by training, you can actually help the muscle to get ATP more easily than just by anaerobic glycolysis. And in such individuals, there will be smaller oxygen depth. So their rate of respiration after exercise would naturally be less. Okay. So if muscle contraction energetics is asked as an answer briefly question, you can write about the introduction. That is, what is this energetics? Why does muscle needs ATP? What are the sources of ATP? What is the efficiency and duration of ATP production in different sources, mention about oxygen depth, and finish it off with the application. So I hope this was useful for you. Thank you.